What happens when one whispered insult becomes the last thing your husband ever hears before walking away? Can a woman who thought she was being honest survive the moment her private humiliation turns public? And how far can a lawful man go when silence speaks louder than revenge? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Isolde, and I swear I didn't mean for him to hear it. It was supposed to be a quiet, stupid little joke, something I whispered to my ex across the table, a moment of nostalgia mixed with wine and vanity. I said my husband wasn't very strong in bed, half laughing, half proving that I could still make someone blush. And then I saw him, standing just a few feet away, frozen, holding his jacket, like he'd already decided he was done. He didn't yell or make a scene. He just looked at me once, eyes steady and calm in a way that scared me more than anger ever could, and walked out. That silence, that measured, absolute silence, was worse than anything I'd imagined. I thought he'd come back. I told myself he was being dramatic, that I'd fix it in the morning, but I didn't understand what was already happening behind that quiet. The notes, the files, the calendar reminders I thought were random. Now I know silence isn't forgiveness, it's preparation. And by the time I realized what he was preparing for, the papers were already printed with my name on them. If I'm being honest, I thought I had control of every conversation that involved me. Words were my thing. How I charmed clients, how I got my sister to side with me during family drama, how I softened my husband's edges when he started turning too serious about bills and deadlines. I could make anything sound harmless if I wanted to. That night, I thought I was being clever again. We were at the rooftop restaurant that overlooked the river, where lights shimmered like they were competing for attention. My sister Leona had insisted on inviting my old friend group, which somehow included Evan, my ex, the one who always made me feel seen, even when I was pretending I didn't care who saw me. Thomas, my husband, sat beside me, polite as ever, answering questions about work like he was in a meeting. I hated that about him sometimes, how measured he was. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to own the room. It made me feel like I was standing on a stage alone. Everyone else was loud. Leona with her bright laugh, Evan making jokes, a friend recording stories for her socials. It felt like my audience. Someone asked if Thomas and I still acted like newlyweds. Leona jumped in before I could answer, saying, "She's married to an engineer, not a poet." Everyone laughed, and I laughed too, because that was easier than defending him. Then Evan leaned closer, his voice low enough to sound like trouble, and asked if Thomas was still steady in every way. I knew what he meant. I should have brushed it off, but the wine and the lights and the thrill of being noticed again made me reckless. I leaned in, close enough that I thought no one else would hear, and said, "Not very strong in bed if you really want to know." Evan's grin widened, and that little reaction, that flicker of amusement, felt like power. I laughed softly, like it was a private joke. Then I saw Thomas's reflection in the glass behind Evan. He was standing there, just behind me, his face unreadable. The laughter around the table kept going, but everything in me froze. He didn't say a word. He just looked at me once, steady, then reached for his jacket on the back of the chair. I tried to act like nothing happened. "Leaving already?" I asked, trying to sound light. He nodded once. "Early meeting," he said, though we both knew it was a lie. He placed his card on the table, told the waiter to settle the bill, and walked toward the elevator. No raised voice, no scene, just quiet. Leona made a face. "He's so dramatic," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Evan chuckled. "Guess someone hit a nerve." I forced a smile. "He'll be fine," I said, pretending I wasn't panicking. My chest felt tight. The room smelled like grilled lemons and perfume, and for a moment I thought I might be sick. After he left, I ordered another drink and tried to steer the conversation back to something funny. The others followed my lead. Gossip about co-workers, jokes about dating apps. But under the laughter, I could feel my phone buzzing in my bag. A message preview flashed. "Please don't come home drunk." I didn't reply. Instead, I tilted my head back and said something about how men couldn't handle harmless honesty. When I finally got home, the house was silent. His shoes were by the door, lined neatly beside the umbrella stand. The hallway light was on, the one he usually turned off before bed. A cup sat on the counter, rinsed and upside down, next to mine, which was half full and cold. I called his name softly, but the only sound was the fridge humming. Our bedroom door was open, the bed perfectly made on his side, untouched. I told myself he just needed space. He'd come around by morning. He always did. That was Thomas's way. Retreat first, talk later. I poured water into the sink just to fill the quiet. My phone buzzed again. Leona had posted a photo from the restaurant, tagging me and captioning it, "Sisters and Secrets." Evan had already liked it. I scrolled through the comments. People were laughing. Someone wrote, "Tell him to up his game." My stomach turned. I almost messaged Leona to take it down, but I didn't want to look guilty. Instead, I posted a selfie from the restaurant with the caption, "Married life, all jokes, no offense." It felt petty, but it made me feel in control again. When I went upstairs, the guest room door was closed. Light seeped from under it. I hesitated, hand hovering over the handle, then pulled back. If he wanted distance, he could have it. I climbed into bed alone, convincing myself that by morning it would blow over. Sleep didn't come. My mind kept replaying the look on his face. Not anger, not even hurt, just this calm that made me feel small. Around midnight, I heard the faint click of a drawer from the other room. Then the soft hum of a printer. I almost got up to ask what he was doing, but something about the steadiness of it stopped me. The sound went on for a while, paper feeding, a single mechanical rhythm. Then silence again. I turned on my side, staring at the glow of my phone screen. No messages, no notifications, except one calendar alert from our shared account. Downtown, 11:45 a.m. I frowned. He never used those reminders. I opened the details, but it only said, "Meeting, personal." No location, no notes. I tried to tell myself it was work-related. Still, something in me tightened. When morning came, the air smelled faintly of toner and coffee. He was already gone. A note on the counter read only, "Took the car. Don't wait up." I rolled my eyes and crumpled it, tossing it into the bin. But when I looked closer, I noticed the corner of the printer tray was still warm, a single blank page sitting there. It had a faint line at the top, like something had been printed and removed. I poured coffee, sat at the table, and scrolled through my phone again. More likes, more comments. My sister's post had spread, people tagging others, turning my marriage into a punchline. I typed a long message to her, deleted it, then texted Thomas instead. "Can we talk?" He didn't reply. Around noon, I checked the shared location on his phone. It was off. He never turned it off. I told myself not to overthink. I even called my mum to complain, making it sound like he was sulking. She sighed and said, "You always think he'll chase you, but maybe he's tired of running." I laughed, but it came out hollow. That evening, he still wasn't home. I ordered dinner, left his plate covered on the counter, and sat scrolling through our old photos. He looked so steady in them. The kind of steady that used to make me feel safe before it made me feel bored. I remembered how, in the early days, he used to watch me talk like I was the only sound in the room. Now that silence felt like a wall I couldn't climb. When the clock hit 10, I messaged him again. "You're really doing this?" No reply. I set my phone down, stared at the ceiling, and said aloud, "He's being ridiculous." The sound of my own voice startled me. I laughed, but no one was there to hear it. The next morning, I found the bed in the guest room perfectly made, his suitcase gone. Only his work mug remained on the nightstand, spotless and dry. I touched it, half expecting warmth. There was none. The calendar alert from his phone pinged again. Downtown, 11:45 a.m. The same time. The same blank line under it. I told myself it was nothing. He'd come back once he cooled off. He always did. But as I stood there in the quiet, I realized the house didn't feel like it was waiting for him anymore. It felt like it had already adjusted to the space he left behind. The house stayed too quiet the next morning, the kind of quiet that makes you check if a window's open, even when you know it isn't. I brewed coffee just to make a sound. The smell filled the kitchen, but it didn't help. His side of the table was empty, his chair pushed in too neatly. I tried to imagine him getting ready for work, the steady rhythm of his routine, but it felt staged, like the scene was already over, and I had missed my line. I checked my phone again. No message. My sister Leona had texted twice. "You too good?" And then that post's going viral, lol. I didn't answer. I didn't even want to look at it, but I did anyway. The photo from the rooftop dinner had more than 2,000 likes. Strangers were commenting little flame emojis. People laughing about how real I was for telling the truth. It should have made me feel seen. Instead, it felt like standing under a light that wouldn't turn off. At 8, I called Thomas, straight to voicemail. I left a breezy message saying I hoped his personal meeting went well and that we should talk tonight. I made my voice sound casual, confident. When I hung up, I noticed the printer light blinking again. I told myself it was just a technical glitch, but the drawer beneath it was slightly open. Inside were folders labeled Utilities, Household, Bank. All his handwriting. I'd seen those labels before, but now they looked deliberate, too neat. I pushed the drawer closed, the click echoing through the room. By 9, I was pacing. I couldn't focus, so I decided to work from the cafe near the office. My freelance client wanted edits, and maybe being out of the house would stop me from checking the door every 5 minutes. I threw on a scarf, opened the front door, and stopped. His car wasn't there. I'd forgotten he said he'd taken it. For a second, I felt a small flare of irritation. He knew I had errands. He could have left it. Then again, maybe that was the point. At the cafe, the barista recognized me from last week and asked if everything was okay. I must have looked off because she offered me a free pastry on the house. I smiled, said thank you, and texted Leona. He's being distant again. Probably mad about the comments. She replied almost instantly, "Girl, he'll get over it. Men hate being the punchline." I typed back, "He's always hated my sense of humor," then deleted it before hitting send. Halfway through editing a product description about eco-friendly soap dispensers, I saw Evan walk in. Of course, he spotted me and walked over like we'd planned it. "Hey, troublemaker," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. I told him I was working. He said, "You're always working when you're guilty." I laughed too loudly. A couple at the next table looked up. Evan grinned. "Still no word from your engineer?" he asked. I told him Thomas was fine, just overreacting. Evan leaned closer. "He'll forgive you, he always does." His tone made it sound like a joke. I told him I didn't need forgiving. "Sure," he said, "but you do need coffee." He ordered 2 more cappuccinos before I could argue. When my phone buzzed again, I thought it was Thomas. It wasn't. It was a notification from the shared calendar, meeting, personal, recurring. Time, 11:45 a.m. Location, blank. I stared at it, then looked up at the clock on the cafe wall. 11:43. I felt this strange pull in my chest, like I should be somewhere else. 2 minutes later, the calendar alert disappeared. I refreshed it. Gone. Evan asked what was wrong, and I said nothing, though my voice cracked halfway through. By noon, I gave up pretending to work. I walked home slowly, past the dry cleaner, past the flower shop where he'd once bought me lilies for no reason. The memory made me angry, which made no sense. I used to love that about him. the small gestures that felt planned but not performative. Now they just made me feel managed. At home, the mail sat neatly stacked on the counter. The top envelope was addressed to him from some professional service downtown. No company logo, just a return address. I picked it up, shook it lightly, and set it down. Not my business, I told myself. Still, I memorized the sender's street name. Old habit. By evening, he still hadn't come home. I called again, straight to voicemail. The message said his mailbox was full. That's when the irritation gave way to fear. Not the romantic kind, the logistical kind. If he was staying somewhere else, what did that mean for the bills, the kids' schedules, the car? I paced through the kitchen. Opening and closing cabinets like that would help me think. When the door finally opened at 10, I jumped. He walked in quietly, hung up his jacket, and went straight to the sink to wash his hands. I waited for him to look at me, to start an argument, but he didn't. I asked if he'd eaten. He said yes. I said we should talk. He said, "About what?" I told him not to play dumb. He dried his hands, folded the towel, and said, "I'm not." His tone wasn't angry, just final. I told him he was being childish. He said, "If I'd said what you said, would you still call it childish?" That caught me off guard. I tried to laugh it off. "You wouldn't," I said. "You're too careful." He nodded slightly. Maybe that's the difference between us. He walked toward the guest room. I called after him. "So that's it? You're just going to ignore me?" He paused at the door, looked back once and said, "I'm not ignoring you, I'm thinking." Then he shut the door. I stood there, furious at how calm he could be. I grabbed my phone and typed a long message. "You can't keep punishing me for a joke." "Grow up." I erased it before sending. Instead, I texted Leona again. "He's acting like I committed a crime." She replied, "Maybe apologize for real." I told her she didn't get it. She sent a shrug emoji. Later, I noticed the glow under the guest room door. I pressed my ear against it and heard faint clicking, typing. The printer hummed again. I whispered his name, but he didn't answer. The sound of paper sliding out was slow, rhythmic. I told myself it was work, just spreadsheets or plans. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that folder labeled household. Around midnight, I made tea I didn't drink. I scrolled through messages, reading comments from strangers who thought my joke was empowering. Someone tagged a gossip account. My stomach twisted. I thought about calling Thomas again, but I didn't want to sound desperate. Instead, I opened his social profile. His last post was from weeks ago, nothing new. Then I noticed his profile picture was gone. Not changed, just blank. I barely slept. When I woke, the printer tray was empty, the drawer locked. On the counter sat 2 mugs again, his spotless, mine half full and cold. He'd left before sunrise. A sticky note sat beside my cup. "Kids drop-off handled. Don't forget the dentist bill." It looked like any other note he'd leave, but something about it felt detached, like a courtesy, not communication. At 9, Ruth called. She asked if everything was all right. Her voice was careful, too careful. I told her yes, just a misunderstanding. She hesitated, then said she'd spoken to Thomas earlier. "He sounded focused," she said. "Focused?" I asked. "On what?" She said, "Just focused," and hung up before I could ask more. The rest of the day blurred. I tried to work but kept glancing at the door, waiting for him to come home and act normal. Instead, I heard the faint buzz of my phone, another notification from the shared account. This time it said, "File uploaded successfully. No details." Just that. I deleted it, pretending it didn't matter. But by evening, I knew the silence wasn't cooling down anymore. It was hardening, setting like cement around me. Every little sound, the click of a door, the hum of a machine, felt like evidence of something I couldn't see yet. And the worst part was how calm he still was, how his order made my chaos look childish. I poured another glass of wine, stared at my reflection in the kitchen window and whispered, "He'll come around." But even I didn't believe it. By Wednesday, I was done pretending things were normal. The house felt sterile, too organized. His shoes lined up perfectly, the trash bins empty, the sink dry. Even the air smelled like detergent and distance. I tried to convince myself he was over it, that this was just another phase of his quiet moods, but the way he moved lately, careful, deliberate, made my stomach twist. That morning, I saw his phone charging on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't dare touch it, but curiosity hummed louder than guilt. I picked it up. The screen was locked, but a calendar notification blinked. Follow-up 3:00 p.m. No location, just like before. I thought about unlocking it with the code I knew by heart, but something in me hesitated. Maybe I didn't want confirmation of whatever I already feared. I put it back exactly where it had been and made sure the cord faced the same direction. I texted Leona. "He's still cold, barely talks, feels like living with a ghost." She replied with a string of eye-roll emojis and, "Maybe he's embarrassed. Don't make it worse." Easy for her to say. She didn't have to eat dinner across from a man who used to laugh when I burned toast and now stared at the salt shaker like it was his last lifeline. I tried to fill the silence with sound. Music, dishes, calls with clients. Anything. I even turned on the TV while folding laundry, just to hear someone speak. That's when my phone buzzed. "Evan. You surviving the awkward phase?" I told him I was fine. He replied, "You don't sound fine. Want to grab a drink after work?" I typed no, deleted it, then wrote maybe one. We met at a small cafe that turned into a bar after 5. He looked exactly the same, effortlessly relaxed, the kind of man who never had to explain himself. He asked if Thomas was still giving me the silent treatment. I said, "He's acting like I cheated." Evan smirked. "Well, you didn't, right?" His tone made it sound like the question didn't really matter. I told him I just needed space from all the judgment. He leaned back and said, "You don't owe anyone an apology for telling the truth." That line landed like validation, even though it shouldn't have. I sipped my wine and said Thomas had always been overly serious. Evan shrugged. "That's engineers for you. All logic, no passion." I laughed a little too loudly. The bartender glanced our way. I could almost hear Leona's voice in my head, "Don't make it look worse." But the truth was, I liked being seen. I liked the idea that someone might think I wasn't just a housewife with a guilty conscience. When I got home later, the lights were off in the living room, but on in the guest room. The soft glow under the door made me pause. I called his name. He answered quietly, "I'm working." I said, "At 10 p.m. He didn't reply. I stood there for a few seconds, then said, "I met Evan for a drink. You can stop acting like I'm hiding anything." He said, "You never hide things. You just rename them." That stopped me cold. What's that supposed to mean? He didn't answer. The faint sound of typing continued. I wanted to push the door open, to make him look at me, but I didn't. Instead, I walked away, telling myself he was being cruel on purpose. In bed, I scrolled through my feed again. The post from the dinner was still spreading. People had started tagging marriage meme accounts. Someone had even stitched it into a reaction video about modern wives speaking their truth. It was humiliating, but also strangely addictive to watch. Every new comment felt like a vote, like maybe I wasn't crazy after all. Around midnight, the printer hummed again. It had become its own kind of ghost, working while I slept. I turned on the lamp, got out of bed, and followed the sound. The sheet slid out slowly, blank again. Only when I held it under the light, faint lines appeared, like something had been printed and erased. I smelled toner, faint but fresh. The next morning, I confronted him. "Are you printing in the middle of the night?" He didn't look up from his coffee. "Sometimes." "What could be that important?" He stirred his cup and said, Records. It helps me think. What records? He looked at me then, calm as ever. Just ours. I laughed, sharp and short. You're not making sense. Maybe not to you. The way he said it made my hands shake. I grabbed my keys and left before I said something worse. At the cafe later, Evan noticed I was distracted. Still weird at home? He asked. Worse, I said. He's acting like he's building a case file or something. Evan chuckled. Maybe he's writing a novel about you. Very funny. He leaned closer. You know, if he's going to treat you like a criminal, you might as well commit a crime. I rolled my eyes, but part of me liked the recklessness in his voice. It felt good to imagine being the one in control again. When I got home that evening, Thomas was already there, sitting at the table with his laptop. His phone was beside him, screen up, the contact name of my sister visible. He'd just hung up. She called me, he said before I could ask. She said you've been stressed. Wow, I said. You two gossiping now? She was worried. She doesn't even know what's going on. He closed the laptop and said, Neither do you. That made me snap. I'm not the one acting like a stranger in my own house. You're the one whispering with my sister. You're the one. He stood, quiet but firm. I don't whisper, I document. What does that even mean? It means I stopped arguing. He walked past me toward the hallway. I shouted after him, You think writing things down makes you right? He didn't turn around. No, it just keeps me honest. After he closed the door, I noticed his mug still on the table. On the coaster under it, faint pen marks had bled through from a note he'd written. I tilted it under the light. It read, File, Archive A. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt wired, like every click or hum had meaning. Around 2 a.m., I crept to the guest room door again. The light was off, but a faint glow from his laptop screen spilled through the crack. I heard the sound of something sliding, paper maybe, then a soft beep, the kind his recording app makes when he ends a file. I whispered, Thomas? No answer. The next morning, I woke to find a new USB drive taped under the taxes folder in the office cabinet. The label read OR4.22. I held it for a moment, then put it back where I found it. I didn't dare open it. Later, at school pickup, Ruth was there waiting for the kids. She smiled tightly. He asked me to help this week, she said. He's reorganizing things. What things? Just things, she said softly. It's better not to make a scene. I wanted to argue, but her calmness unnerved me. Everyone was calm but me. That evening, I set the table for dinner out of habit, though I knew he wouldn't sit with me. When he came home, he went straight to his study. I followed him halfway down the hall before stopping. His door was ajar just enough for me to see him slide a printed sheet into a folder, label it, and place it neatly in a box marked Archive B. I asked quietly, Are we going to talk or are you just going to keep printing our lives? He didn't look up. I prefer facts to stories. I said, You can't turn a marriage into paperwork. He closed the folder and said, You already did. I stood there, speechless. The printer light blinked again, and he didn't even flinch. That night, when I finally went to bed, I realized I didn't even know which side of the house he slept on anymore. Every room felt half empty, half claimed. I tried to tell myself it was temporary, that once he cooled down, we'd laugh about how dramatic we'd both been. But deep down, I knew we weren't in the same story anymore. He was writing his version, line by line, while I kept pretending I could still edit mine. Sunday felt like a performance I hadn't rehearsed for. Ruth invited us for dinner, which was her way of saying she wanted to measure the damage. She'd used the same tone she always did, soft, polite, impossible to refuse. You two need a nice meal, she'd said on the phone. Sometimes quiet food helps noisy hearts. I almost laughed at that, but I said yes anyway. Maybe I thought a family setting would force him to thaw. Maybe I wanted witnesses in case he started acting cold again. He drove. The car was silent except for the sound of the turn signal and my own restless breathing. He looked ahead, steady hands on the wheel, his face unreadable in the reflection of passing streetlights. I tried to make small talk. He answered politely, but without texture. Works fine. Kids' school project went well. Each sentence was a door he closed behind him. When we pulled into Ruth's driveway, the lights in the kitchen were already on. She opened the door before we could knock. "You're right on time," she said, smiling too tightly. Milo and Clara ran past us to the living room, their laughter cutting through the tension, like they hadn't noticed it had weight. I envied that. Dinner smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary. The table was set for 5, but there was a new seat arrangement, Thomas at the end near Ruth, me at the opposite side. "It's just easier for serving," she said, though I could see the calculation behind it. We sat. The clink of utensils filled the pauses where conversation should have been. I tried to sound cheerful, asking about Ruth's garden, complimenting her food. Thomas stayed quiet. At one point, Clara asked if Daddy was still working in the office room. Ruth glanced at me before answering. He's very organized these days. I smiled stiffly and said, "Yes, your father's all about structure lately." Thomas didn't look up. Leona had promised to stop by for moral support, and when she finally arrived, she brought her phone like a prop. "Family dinner," she announced, holding it up to snap a picture. I waved it away, but she was already posting. Thomas blinked once, slowly, like he'd seen this scene before. We made it halfway through dinner before Ruth asked the question I'd been waiting for. "So," she said, folding her napkin neatly, "how are things between you two?" I jumped in before Thomas could answer. "Fine, just a misunderstanding blown out of proportion." Thomas cut into his food, his knife gliding so precisely that the sound of it made my skin prickle. "Interesting choice of words," he said quietly. Ruth looked between us. "I'm sure every marriage has its bumps. You'll talk it through." "We always do," I said quickly. "We're just different types of communicators." He finally looked at me. "That's one way to put it." The silence that followed was heavy enough to make even Leona stop typing. I picked up my glass of wine, pretending to study the label. The reflection of his gaze lingered on the rim like something measured, catalogued. After dinner, I helped Ruth clear the table while Thomas stayed with the kids. She didn't speak until we were alone at the sink. "He's been seeing a counselor," she said softly, not meeting my eyes. "For what?" "For guidance," he said, "to make things clear." "Clear about what?" She rinsed a plate, set it in the rack, and said, "About boundaries." The word made me laugh, too sharp. Boundaries? He's the one who hasn't said a full sentence to me in a week. "Sometimes silence isn't distance," she said. "Sometimes it's planning." Her tone was calm, but I could hear the warning underneath. I almost asked if she knew something I didn't, but then Thomas walked in with the kids, and the moment vanished. After dinner, the kids begged to stay the night at their grandmother's. Ruth said yes before I could protest. "You two need rest," she said. I wanted to argue, but Thomas was already nodding. "Good idea," he said. "I'll pick them up tomorrow." On the drive home, I tried to talk again. "She told me you're seeing someone," I said. "A professional," he corrected. "For marriage?" "For myself." "Why?" He didn't answer right away. "To stay focused," he said finally. "Focused on what?" "On being fair." I wanted to laugh, but the way he said it made something cold move through me. When we got home, he went straight upstairs. I lingered in the living room, scrolling through Leona's new post. The photo from dinner was already up. The caption read, "Family night healing time." I wanted to throw the phone across the room. The comments had started again. People asking if Thomas had forgiven me yet. Some joking about strong husbands surviving weak jokes. My hands trembled as I typed a reply and deleted it twice before giving up. I poured another drink and wandered into his study. The air smelled faintly of paper and toner. Everything was spotless, too neat. The printer light blinked softly. on the shelf, I noticed a new binder, grey, unmarked. I opened it halfway, expecting bills or receipts, but inside were notes written in his tidy handwriting. Dates, descriptions, short phrases, dinner, rooftop, remarks, recorded, social media post, public reaction logged, bank statement, copies filed. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He had written everything down like we were a project under audit. I wanted to rip the pages, to scatter them, but instead I stood there reading line after line, trying to find a version of me that sounded less cruel. There wasn't one. I heard footsteps on the stairs. I shoved the binder back onto the shelf just as he appeared at the door. Looking for something. Your sense of humor, I said quickly. He didn't smile. Careful, Isolde. You keep making everything sound like a joke. Because it was a joke, I said, my voice rising. You're acting like I broke the law. He leaned against the frame. Don't worry, I'm handling it properly. Something in his tone made my chest tighten. Handling what? He didn't answer. He just picked up a file from the desk, slid it into his bag, and walked out of the room. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Every sound felt suspicious. The hum of the fridge, the click of the hallway light. I went downstairs, opened a random cabinet, and there it was again. A small USB drive taped under the shelf, labeled 04.24. My hands shook as I peeled it off, but before I could plug it in, I heard his footsteps. I shoved it into my pocket and turned to face him. He stood in the doorway, calm as ever. Can't sleep? Neither can you. I was finishing something, he said. What are you finishing, Thomas? A report on your wife? He looked at me for a long time. Documentation makes things easier later. For what? Divorce? I spat the word before I could stop it. He didn't flinch. For clarity. I laughed, the sound brittle. You're unbelievable. And you're still performing, he said quietly, even now. He walked past me to the fridge, poured a glass of water, and left without another word. When he was gone, I pulled the USB from my pocket and stared at it. My reflection in the metal looked warped, stretched thin. I didn't open it. I slid it into a drawer, buried under old receipts. By morning, the kids were home again, cheerful and loud, pretending nothing had changed. Ruth dropped them off with a soft smile and said she'd see us soon. I wanted to ask if Thomas had told her anything, but she only said, "Take care of yourself." In that way mothers do when they mean it's too late to fix it now. Thomas left early for work. His desk looked untouched, except for a new folder labeled Archive C. I sat in his chair and stared at the empty screen. It felt like being erased line by line, while someone else kept the copies safe. I told myself he was bluffing, that all his order was just control dressed as calm. Still, the word he'd used, properly, stayed with me all day, like an echo waiting for a date to attach itself to. Thursday started grey and airless, the kind of morning that feels like it's waiting for something to end. The blinds were half closed, and the house carried the faint smell of printer toner again. I told myself I was imagining it, that I'd been paranoid lately. But when I walked past his study, the light on the printer was blinking softly like a heartbeat. I turned it off without looking at what it was doing. I didn't want to know anymore. He came down a few minutes later, freshly shaved, his tie straight, his expression calm as glass. "You're up early," he said. His voice wasn't kind or cold, just even. That tone terrified me more than anger ever could. I asked if he wanted breakfast. He said, "Already had some." I asked if he'd be home late. "Possibly." He poured coffee, rinsed the cup, and left it on the opposite counter from mine again. That tiny act, 2 mugs, 2 corners, felt like a declaration of war. After he left, I opened his drawer. It didn't budge. Locked again. The small silver key that used to hang by the pantry was gone. I sat on the floor and stared at the wood grain until my phone buzzed. Leona had texted, "You look exhausted." "Did you two fight again?" I typed. "He's being weird. I think he's planning something. she replied. Like what? Another silent treatment? I started to write. No, worse, but deleted it. I couldn't work. I kept pacing between rooms, the sound of my slippers sliding over the tiles. Around noon, Ruth called. Her tone was too calm. Thomas stopped by this morning, she said. He dropped off some papers for safekeeping. My heart jumped. What papers? I asked. Household things, she said quickly. You'll see. And then she changed the subject. To the weather, to the kids' recital, to anything that wasn't an answer. When I hung up, I checked the kitchen for anything new. There, on the counter, lay a note in his handwriting. Meeting, 4:30 p.m. downtown. The words were precise, like everything he wrote. I touched the paper, felt the indentation of his pen strokes. It was so normal looking, but it made my throat close. I didn't know if I wanted him to come home or not. At 3, I sat by the window, watching the street. His car pulled in at 4:15. He came inside quietly, holding a folder under his arm. You're early, I said, forcing a laugh. Meeting cancelled? He nodded once. Moved up. He took off his jacket, placed it over the chair, and looked around the room as if memorizing it. Then he said, We need to talk. I crossed my arms. Finally. He stayed standing. This isn't a fight, he said. I'm not here to argue anymore. Then what are you here for? He looked at me steadily. To be clear. The way he said it made my stomach twist. Clear about what? He didn't answer right away. He set the folder on the table and opened it, not wide enough for me to see inside, just enough to glance at it himself. Then he closed it again and said, I've spoken to some people. What people? Professionals, he said. Advisors. My laugh came out sharp. Oh, great. Now you're outsourcing our marriage. He didn't rise to it. I'm making sure everything is handled properly. I tried to keep my voice calm. Handled? You make it sound like a business transaction. He looked down at the folder. That's what you turned it into. That's not fair. No, he said, but it's true. The silence stretched until it felt physical. He finally sat down, folded his hands. I'm not angry anymore, he said. That's the difference. I didn't know what to say. I'd always known how to provoke him, to draw a reaction, to twist an argument until it bent in my favor. But there was nothing to push against now. I told him he was overreacting. He said, You keep calling everything, that because you can't imagine being wrong. I looked at the clock. Is this the part where you tell me you're leaving? He shook his head. Not yet. Then what do you want? He stood again, gathering the folder. Order. That word hit me harder than I expected. Order? That's all you care about? He smiled faintly. It's the only thing left to care about. He went upstairs. I stood there in the kitchen, breathing shallowly. I opened the folder the second I heard the bedroom door close, but it was empty, just a single sticky note inside, with the words, Bring forms. I stared at it until my vision blurred. That night, he didn't sleep in the guest room. He didn't sleep in our bed either. The lights in his study stayed on until dawn. I lay awake, listening to the faint clicking of keys and the occasional soft hum of the printer. The sounds blended into the rhythm of my heartbeat. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked into his study unannounced. He looked up, surprised, but not startled. You shouldn't be in here, he said. I ignored him and pointed to the files stacked neatly on the desk. What are these? Copies. Of what? Everything, he said simply. You're scaring me. He sighed, rubbed his forehead. You always say that when consequences show up, I snapped. You think this is about consequences? You're building some kind of case like I'm a criminal. He looked at me evenly. I'm building peace. I laughed bitterly. Peace? Is that what you call this silence? These files? You're obsessed. He shut his laptop gently. No, I'm prepared. I slammed the drawer nearest me just to hear something loud. Prepared for what, Thomas? He stood, calm again, the same way he had been that night at the restaurant. For what comes next? I stepped closer. You think you can scare me with all this? Go ahead, file whatever you want. I'm not the one who ruined this. He didn't flinch. Keep telling yourself that. I shouted his name, but he was already walking away. The last thing he said before leaving the room was quiet, almost kind. You'll understand soon. The day crawled. I tried to distract myself, clean the counters, organize drawers, but every object felt misplaced. Even the air between us had its own filing system. When the kids came home from school, I pretended everything was fine. He helped them with homework like nothing was wrong. He even smiled once when Clara showed him her drawing. For a moment, I almost believed we were still normal. After they went to bed, he stood by the window, looking out at the streetlights. I asked if he was coming to bed. He said, "Not tonight." "Why not?" "I have to be up early." "For what?" He turned to me, eyes steady. "For closure." Something in his tone made me step back. Closure for who? "For both of us," he said, "but mostly for me." He picked up his jacket, checked his phone, and started toward the stairs. I grabbed his arm. "You can't just walk around acting like some lawyer. Talk to me." He looked at my hand on his sleeve, then at me. "I'm done talking." I let go. "What are you going to do?" He paused at the door. "Handle it properly." The sound of the latch closing behind him was soft but absolute. The car engine started, faded into the night. I stood there in the doorway, shaking. Somewhere in the house, a printer light blinked once, then went dark. I didn't sleep. I kept hearing that line, "Handle it properly," until it wasn't a promise anymore. It was a warning. When dawn finally came, the house looked different, smaller somehow, like it had already decided which one of us it belonged to. He was waiting in the lobby when I arrived, standing beside a woman in a grey suit. For a moment, I thought he looked relieved to see me, until I noticed the envelope in his hand. I called his name, but he didn't answer. The woman stepped forward and said something about service of documents, her voice smooth, practiced. I tried to laugh, to turn it into another misunderstanding, but my throat wouldn't work. He just nodded once and said, "It's all formal now." I opened the envelope. Divorce petition, temporary custody, my own name printed in black ink that looked heavier than it should.